If you would have asked me a year ago, I would have said that my wife Mary is the most honest and moral person I have ever known. We were married for 10 years, we had an 8-year-old daughter, Emily, and we were living a quiet life in a cozy home. Everything seemed normal until this happened. You won't believe how it all ended. What happened at the end of this story will make you think hard. So listen to this story to the end because the most interesting thing will be at the end. Mary was not just my wife, she was the wife. The one that people admire. She volunteered at St. Andrew's almost every weekend, helping to organize community events and was practically Father Michael's right hand. She baked cookies for church gatherings, decorated the altar for holidays, and even stayed late for important meetings. I work from home, running a small online consulting business. This allowed me to take care of Emily and keep the house in order while Mary did her holy things. Every Sunday we sat together in the same pew at St. Andrew's Church. Mary would hold Emily's little hand while Father Michael preached his sermon. He was a charismatic man, sharp-tongued, and always had a kind word for everyone. Mary admired him, and to be honest, so did I. For a long time, I believed I had won the lottery of life. It all started with something small, a late text message. It was a Tuesday night, and Mary and I were sitting on the couch watching one of those crime shows. Her phone vibrated, and she grabbed it faster than I'd ever seen it. She looked at the screen, smiled slightly, and quickly typed something before putting the phone down, screen down. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Oh, yeah. It's just Father Michael. He needs some notes for a fundraiser this weekend." I didn't think much of it. After all, it was Father Michael. But after that I started to notice a pattern. Mary started staying late after the evening church meetings. "It's very busy with the fundraisers," she would say. She would come home tired, sometimes aloof, sometimes overly affectionate, as if trying to compensate for something. One day she came home at almost midnight. Emily was long asleep, and I was waiting for her on the couch. When she came in, she looked confused. I could barely smell something on her, perfume. But it was definitely not her usual lavender. "Busy evening?" I asked. "Oh, you wouldn't believe it," she said, throwing her bag down on a chair. "Father Michael and I have been reviewing the entire seating chart for the gala. It's chaos." The next day, she left her phone on the kitchen table when she went to take a shower. I'm not ashamed of what I did next. When I picked up her phone, the screen was locked, but a message appeared on top. "I can't stop thinking about last night. We need to be more careful, Em." My heart clenched. Father Michael. It couldn't be true. It was Mary, my Mary. I couldn't sleep that night. Mary was lying next to me. I looked up at the ceiling, replaying the message in my head over and over again. The next morning, Mary kissed me on the cheek before she walked out the door, her church bag hanging over her shoulder. "Busy day today." She smiled cheerfully. "Oh, yes. Father Michael wants me to help plan the gala. I'm going to be late, so don't wait for me, okay?" For the first time in our marriage, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I couldn't get that message out of my head. We need to be more careful. Mary had become a stranger in our home. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that I was overreacting, letting my paranoia take over. That Friday night, Mary said she would be late at church again. As soon as she left, I grabbed my keys. I told myself I was just going to check it out, see if she was really there. But somewhere deep inside I knew I was chasing answers. When I arrived at St. Andrew's, the church was almost empty. The parking lot was dimly lit, with only a few cars in it. One of them belonged to Mary. The other belonged to Father Michael. I recognized his individual license plate. When I opened the door to it, there was a heavy smell of wax inside. It was dead silent, with only the hum of distant voices coming through. I followed the sound down the dark corridor, my heart pounding in my chest. And then I stopped. The door to Father Michael's office was ajar, just enough for me to see what was going on inside. Mary was standing there, her back to me, her head down, and she was crying. Father Michael stood next to her, his hand on her shoulder. His voice was quiet, soothing, as if he was comforting her. I wanted to storm into the room and demand an explanation. 1,000 thoughts were running through my head. That night Mary came back around midnight. Her eyes were red and she avoided my gaze. How was the meeting? She stopped, clutching the strap of her bag. It was emotional. We talked about important things today. The way she said it, the way her voice trembled, was not grief or sadness. It was guilt. The next morning, while Mary went shopping, I returned to St. Andrew's. I had a plan. I set up a tiny hidden camera in Father Michael's office. I carefully hid it behind a bookshelf, pointing directly at the couch and desk. I was disgusted to do this. For the next 3 nights, I barely slept. Every time Mary went to church, I waited. And on the 4th night, I watched the recording. The laptop screen glowed in the dark as the video began to play. At first, it was just Father Michael sitting at his desk, writing something down. Then Mary came in. They spoke quietly for a few minutes. She looked upset. And then he kissed her. It was intentional. I slammed my laptop shut so hard. My mind couldn't process what I had just seen. Mary. My wife. With him. I sat in silence for what seemed like an eternity, running each lie through my mind. If they thought they could make a fool of me, they were wrong. I was going to expose them. But I was going to do it on my own terms. But suspicion is not proof. And without proof, I couldn't accuse her. Every time Mary spoke, laughed, or said, "I love you," I felt like I was choking. She started to notice. "John, are you okay? You've been quiet lately." "I'm just tired," I mumbled, avoiding her gaze. The lies began to pile up, not only on her part, but on mine as well. It happened on Tuesday. Emily had gone to a friend's house for a sleepover, and Mary had another late meeting at church, no doubt. But this time I didn't stay home to wait. I went to St. Andrew's. Minutes seemed like hours as I sat there. Finally, the church door opened and Mary came out. She was alone. She was holding something, a small box. She looked around, her eyes darting nervously across the darkened grounds, before she quickly headed for her car. I crouched lower in the seat, my heart pounding in my chest. What was in that box? A gift? Instead, I waited. A few minutes later, another figure appeared at the door. Father Michael. He didn't have his usual calm expression. He looked agitated. His head was jerking from side to side, as if he was looking for someone or making sure no one was looking at him. And then he disappeared back inside. Something was wrong. At home, I was waiting for Mary. She came in around midnight. The box was no longer in her hands. A long evening. She paused for a moment. A busy week for Father Michael, huh? Her eyes fluttered slightly. Yes. He's been under a lot of pressure lately. Poor guy. She kissed my cheek, told me she was very tired, and went upstairs. I stood there with my fists clenched. The next morning I made a decision. While Mary was getting ready for work, I went to the garage and checked on her car. I didn't know what I expected to find: a confession letter. A secret diary. But what I found was much worse. A crumpled check under the passenger seat. One night at the Golden Sparrow Hotel. Paid in cash. The date coincided with one of her church meetings. I put the receipt back and returned to the house. Mary was standing in the kitchen, humming a tune and pouring coffee into her favorite cup. She looked happy. Calm. Everything okay, honey? I forced a smile. Yeah. Everything's fine. But nothing was okay. Over the next few days, I began to piece together the puzzle. Late night texts. The perfume. The long looks between Mary and Father Michael. The check from the hotel. But each answer brought more questions. Why the box? What was inside? Why did Mary look so scared that night in church? And then something happened that changed everything. It was a Sunday. We were sitting in church together as usual. Father Michael was preaching the sermon, but he looked confused. He kept wiping sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting around the room. Mary kept her head down, clutching Emily's hand too tightly. And then it happened. A man I had never seen before burst into the church. His voice rang out in the sacred silence. "Michael, you can't hide forever, they deserve to know." Sighs of relief rippled through the room. Father Michael's face turned pale. Mary put her hand over her mouth. But the biggest question was beating in my chest. What's going on? The dream became a distant memory. I opened my eyes. Emily still needed me. My little girl. Every time I put her to bed, when she looked up at me with her trusting eyes, I felt a flash of anger not only at Mary and Father Michael, but at myself. How had I let this happen? The next day, while Mary was at church and Emily was at school, I returned to St. Andrew's. I didn't come to pray. The door to Father Michael's office was closed this time. The small window behind the office was slightly ajar. His office was tidy. The books were perfectly aligned on the shelves, the papers were folded with mathematical precision. But something seemed off. I started with the obvious, the desk drawers. They were locked. A bookshelf. Nothing suspicious. Then I noticed a small locker in the corner. It was not locked. Inside, I found a small collection of personal items, a few photographs, a handwritten note, and the box. The box Mary used to keep. It was heavier than I had expected. I hesitated for a moment before opening the lid. Inside was a necklace. Fragile, golden, with a single emerald pendant. It didn't look overly expensive. There was also a folded note underneath. "You deserve to be happy. No one else needs to know. M." I heard footsteps outside the door. I froze. The door handle trembled. "Who is it?" Father Michael's voice. I quickly put the box back in my locker, slammed it shut, and hid behind my desk as the door creaked open. Through the narrow gap under the desk I could see Father Michael's shoes. He stood there for a moment, breathing heavily, and then walked over to the locker. He took a box and stared at it. He sighed heavily, muttered something under his breath, then turned and walked out, locking the door behind him. I stayed hidden for another 5 minutes. When I finally got out through the same window. That evening I almost ran into Mary. "Where were you today?" "Church." "You know that, John. Don't you ever think that? Father Michael relies on you a little too much." "Oh, John, don't be ridiculous. He's under a lot of pressure right now. I'm just helping out where I can." Emily giggled as she looked at something on her tablet, and the tension eased. I let it go, for now. Charities. Fraud. It wasn't just about the affair. It was something more. Dirtier. More dangerous. I spent several hours digging into St. Andrew's finances. It was difficult. The church was very protective of its accounts. But eventually I found a pattern. Large sums of money were regularly withdrawn from the charity fund, thousands of dollars to an anonymous account. The withdrawals coincided almost perfectly with Mary's late nights. Novels. Stolen money. Fake charity events. At that moment, Mary walked into the office. "Hi," she said quietly, smiling slightly, "you've been sitting here all night. Are you okay?" I looked at her, the woman with whom I had built a life, the mother of my child. And for the first time in 10 years, I realized. I don't know her at all. I waited until I heard the bedroom door close, and then turned back to the screen. Mary still tried to act normal. She kissed me goodbye, made lunch for Emily, hummed soft tunes while cooking dinner. But her eyes. They said something else. I started to notice more. Little things. She would take her phone to the bathroom with her. She would leave the room during certain calls. Her late returns from church became more frequent, and her explanations more memorized. But the strangest thing happened on Wednesday afternoon. Emily caught a fever and stayed home. I took the day off to take care of her. Around noon, Mary called. "John, I need to go to church. There's a problem with the supplies for a charity event. I won't be long." That night I decided to do something I would never have dared. When Mary fell asleep, I snuck downstairs and opened her laptop. I didn't know what I was looking for: emails, messages, something. At first I found nothing. But then I found a folder called Receipts. One document stood out. It was not a receipt. It was a scanned letter. It was from Father Michael. "Mary, we can't go on like this. People are starting to notice. We need to be more careful. If John finds out, I don't know what he'll do. We need to talk." Over the next few days, I watched Mary more closely. Every night when she went to church, I took note of the time she left and when she returned. I started tracking her movements not out of anger, but out of desperation. One evening she returned late, clutching her bag as if her life depended on it. Her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. "Is everything okay?" She nodded quickly, her voice strained. "Just a rough evening. Father Michael is going through a difficult time. He needs support." Support. After she went to bed, I checked her bag. At the bottom, in a small pocket, I found a key with a faded tag: Room 214. A hotel key. But instead of confronting her, I put the key back. For now. The next day I went to the hotel. Golden Sparrow Inn. It was not far from the church. At the front desk I hesitated. "Excuse me, my wife stayed here recently." "Room 214. She thinks she might have forgotten something." The receptionist checked the computer and nodded. "Yes, room 214 was occupied a few nights ago. By someone named Mary Collins. Do you have any security footage from that night?" The employee raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but we can't provide that information without official authorization." I nodded, mumbled a thank you and walked out. But I had already had enough. A room key. A name. The night she was silent about. At home, I tried to hold on. Emily was playing with dolls in the living room, her laughter filling the house. Mary came down the stairs, elegantly dressed, her coat over her arm. "Are you going out again?" I asked her calmly. "Yes. Another meeting at the church. It's important." I sat on the couch, staring at the emptiness. Today I would not follow her. I won't check her phone or laptop. I'm done playing detective. It's time to get ready. Time to gather everything, every receipt, every message, every suspicion, and turn it into something irrefutable. If Mary and Father Michael thought they were smarter than me, they were wrong. I will put an end to this. Emily, my little Emily, was the only thing that kept me grounded. Every hug she gave me, every request for help with her homework, reminded me that there was more at stake than my pride. I made a list of everything I had. Suspicious text messages. Perfume. A hotel receipt. A velvet box. Financial documents with strange charges. A letter on Mary's laptop. Late night meetings with Father Michael. The next morning, something strange happened. When Mary walked into the kitchen, she was wearing a church volunteer's t-shirt, her hair in a messy ponytail. But in her hand was an envelope. She placed it on the table in front of me, her lips pressed into a thin line. "What is it?" "Open it," she said quietly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "John, I think we need some time apart. Things have been complicated lately. I'm going to a friend's house for a while. Please don't make things harder than they already are. Take care of Emily. I'll be in touch." I looked up. This is not serious. You can't do this. I need space, John. Please understand." And before I could say anything, she turned and walked away, slinging her bag over her shoulder. "Where's Mom going?" She needs some time to herself, honey," I said softly. "Everything will be fine." Mary didn't come back that night. Nor the next. Her absence should have brought me relief, but instead a sense of unease grew inside me. Something was wrong. I drove to the church. I crept closer, my heart pounding furiously in my chest. The window was slightly ajar, and I heard voices inside. "You said it was settled." Mary's voice, sharp, panicked. "That's enough, Mary. If you want to keep everything from falling apart, do as I say." At home, I sat in the dark, replaying their conversation over and over in my head. Whatever was happening there was getting out of control. And I had a bad feeling that time was running out. Mary didn't return for another week. That night, while Emily slept peacefully in her room, I sat in the living room, spreading out all the evidence I had collected. A text message. The hotel receipt. The necklace. Financial documents. A photograph. It was time to act. But whatever awaited me at the end of this journey, I had a feeling it would destroy everything I had ever known. The next morning I took Emily to school and made a decision. I would not hide anymore. I went straight to St. Andrew's Church. This time I didn't sneak around. The church was almost empty, with only a few elderly volunteers arranging flowers at the altar. I went straight to Father Michael's office and opened the door without knocking. He was sitting at his desk, scribbling in a leather notebook. When he looked up, his face remained calm, but his eyes gave him away. I closed the door behind me. We need to talk. Now. He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. What about Mary? I asked sharply. His brow twitched. I'm not sure I understand. Stop pretending, I interrupted. She's nervous. She's scared. And I know you know why. There was an oppressive silence between us. John, sometimes in life you have to sacrifice something for the greater good. What does that mean? He turned to me, his face emotionless. You're digging in the wrong places. For your sake and for Emily's sake stop. Are you threatening my daughter? No. He shook his head slowly. But when people get too close to things they shouldn't know, bad things happen. I'm asking you, John, as a friend, to stop. I turned and walked out without another word, my chest burning with rage and fear. That night I did not hesitate. I went to Mary's laptop. Inside were dozens of emails between Mary and Father Michael, discussing transfers, offshore accounts, fake charitable contributions, and promises to keep it a secret. But one letter stood out. It was short. Simple. He asks too many questions. I will take care of everything. Don't worry about John. It was sent by Father Michael. And it was dated yesterday. I'll take care of him. What did that mean? The next day I left Emily at home. Daddy, why aren't we going to school today? She asked as I packed a small bag with the essentials. We're going on a little trip, honey, I said, trying to smile. I put her in the car and drove off. No specific destination, just away. But halfway out of town, I noticed a car in the rearview mirror. A black sedan. Tinted windows. It had been following us for too long. Emily, honey, I said softly, trying to stay calm, put on your headphones and watch something on your tablet, okay? She nodded, unsuspecting. The sedan followed us mile after mile. Every turn, every traffic light, it was there. At the nearest gas station, I made a sharp turn, took Emily's hand, and ran into a small store. A sedan stopped in the parking lot. Two men got out. Suits. Sunglasses. They didn't look like the usual church volunteers. I sat down next to Emily in the snack aisle, holding her tightly to me. I couldn't run anymore. I couldn't hide anymore. I had to finish this. That night we stayed in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. Emily fell asleep on one of the beds, hugging her stuffed rabbit. I sat on the edge of the other bed, looking at my phone. That night when I left the Golden Sparrow Hotel, something in me changed. And as I gripped the steering wheel, I knew one thing, I wasn't going to just settle things. I was going to destroy them. Not with my fists. Not with fists. But with evidence. They thought they were untouchable. Mary believed that her tears and carefully rehearsed lies would save her. Father Michael thought his cassock and gentle sermons would be his shield. But their overconfidence was their weakness. And I was going to take advantage of it. For several days I worked in silence. Every minute that Mary and Father Michael thought they were going to get away with it, I gathered evidence. Emails, I dug through Mary's accounts, finding encrypted messages and secret correspondence. Bank transfers, offshore accounts linked to bogus charities signed by Mary and Father Michael. Receipts, hotel stays, expensive gifts, lavish dinners, all paid for with other people's money. Video evidence. I returned to the church late at night and installed hidden cameras in Father Michael's office. I recorded the two of them, whispering, exchanging envelopes, planning their next steps. But it wasn't enough to know the truth, I had to make sure everyone knew about it. One day, when Mary was at church and Emily was at school, I visited the financial office of St. Andrew's Church. The volunteer accountant, a quiet elderly woman named Ruth, was easy to talk to. Father Michael asked me to help organize the charity's finances. I lied sweetly, smiling. Can I have access to the latest reports? She hesitated, but I leaned closer. He's very worried. I just want to help him. Within minutes, I had full access to the church's accounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars were being transferred to shell organizations and then diverted to personal accounts abroad. Signature: Mary Collins and Father Michael. I copied all the files to an external hard drive and left without being seen. That night, Mary came home late. Rough night. I asked calmly from the kitchen. You know how it is. Church meetings sometimes run late. I nodded, sipping my coffee. Of course. She stood there a little longer, as if she wanted to say something. But she didn't. Instead, she went upstairs. I watched her go. I already had everything I needed. There was no turning back. Over the next week, I prepared. I hired a lawyer who was an uncompromising specialist in corporate fraud. I handed him all the files, photos, time-stamped recordings. Make this public, I said. As soon as I give you the signal, make it public. He nodded. They won't recover from this. That's the whole point. I also set up an email blast to the local media, the church council, and even senior representatives of the diocese. When the time came, it would blow up everywhere. But there was still something else that needed to be done. Mary's phone rang late one night while she was in the shower. A message from Father Michael. Tomorrow. After the charity gala. Let's wrap it up. Wrap it up. The night of the annual St. Andrew's Charity Gala was the culmination of the social year. Candles illuminated the hall with elegant chandeliers, and an orchestra played classical melodies. The guests, well-known philanthropists, city officials and parishioners, gathered in anticipation of an evening full of speeches, gratitude, and charitable pledges. Mary looked flawless as always, a black dress perfectly fitting her figure, her makeup emphasizing her beauty. Stun them tonight, I said quietly. She smiled. As soon as she was about to give her speech, I checked my phone. Everything was ready. I sent the lawyer a message. Go ahead. It all started with a little excitement. First, news notifications appeared on the guests' smartphones, financial reports, shocking evidence of money transfers to personal accounts. Muffled conversations began to be heard in the hall, which quickly turned into whispers and then into open, surprised exclamations. Mary, who had been standing on the stage during the welcome speech, felt a wave of tension. Her eyes began to dart nervously around the room. Father Michael, who was initially engaged in communicating with the guests of honor, suddenly received a series of messages on his phone. He stepped aside, trying to hide from the public eye. But this was only the beginning. When Mary finished her speech, the audience's attention was drawn to an unexpected flash of the projector. I went up on stage, took the microphone, and stopped the music. I'm sorry to interrupt your evening, I began in a calm voice. But there are a few things you all need to know. On the big screen behind me, photographs appeared, clear, undeniable shots of Mary and Father Michael. They were in an embrace, in a room that was clearly not a church. Another picture showed them together in a hotel, exchanging kisses. The room stood still. Some people in the crowd gasped, some started whispering, some just froze with a glass in their hand. Mary stood by the table, her face full of horror. She took a step forward, but I held up my hand to stop her. This isn't just about the betrayal, I continued. This is about the money you all trusted the church with. Money that was used for personal enrichment. Money that financed this. Screenshots of bank transactions, bills from expensive restaurants and hotels appeared on the screen. Father Michael made a motion as if he wanted to say something, but the guests had already raised their phones, taking pictures of the screen and sending them to social media. I leave it to you to decide whether you will continue to trust these people, I concluded, putting down the microphone. Mary rushed to my side after I came down from the stage. Her face was pale and her eyes were full of tears. "John, please, you don't understand," she began, but I turned away. "I understand enough." The guests began to leave the room. The phones kept ringing and the news headlines were already spreading on the internet. It was the beginning of the end. By morning, the city knew everything. The diocese announced an investigation. Bank accounts were frozen and police were preparing arrest warrants. Mary returned home later that day, her makeup smeared. She stood in the doorway, her shoulders shaking. "John, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she whispered. "You didn't mean for what to go this far? The lies? The money? Or the betrayal? No one will suspect anything, Mary. They trust us. They trust us." The consequences were swift and brutal. The headlines. News reports. Whispers in every corner of the city. Charity fraud scandal rocks St. Andrews. Mary Collins and Father Michael are under investigation. Bank accounts frozen. Church council meetings turned into chaos. Parishioners demanded answers. And Mary? She was no longer at home. She was staying with a distant cousin, at least that's what I heard from the town gossip. Father Michael had disappeared altogether. But I wasn't done yet. I had one more move to make. The evidence was strong, but exposure. Public humiliation. That was something neither Mary nor Father Michael could recover from. I turned to a local journalist who was not afraid to take on difficult stories. I gave him all the remaining evidence I had. And I gave him one last gift. A recording. I pulled it from one of the hidden cameras I had installed in Father Michael's office a few weeks ago. It was devastating evidence. Father Michael and Mary are discussing financial transfers. They laugh at donors. They ignore fears that they might be exposed. The journalist's eyes lit up when he heard the recording. This is going to go viral," he said. And so it did. The next morning, the recording was everywhere, on social media, in the news, on radio stations. I opened the door and saw Mary. She stood there, pale, her makeup smeared, clutching her bag as if it were her only support. "John, please, why are you here, Mary?" Tears began to flow as she walked into the house. "They froze everything, John. The accounts, the money, it's all gone. I have nothing left." I stared at her, feeling anger, pity, and something else I couldn't explain. "You chose this, Mary. You chose it. You chose that life. And now you want me to, what? Save you? I didn't want that, John. I didn't want any of this. I went too far. I was afraid. You weren't afraid when you signed those documents. You weren't afraid when you secretly met with him behind my back." We sat in silence for a long time. "Emily shouldn't see you like this," I finally said. "You should go away." "Where?" "I have nowhere else to go. It's not my problem anymore." I opened the door, and after a short pause, Mary walked out into the night. The door closed behind her with a sound like a tombstone closing a grave. Father Michael did not have the same happiness as Mary. The diocese launched a full investigation. Subsequently, criminal charges were filed: fraud, embezzlement, breach of trust. A week later, he was arrested, dragged out of a quiet suburb in handcuffs. Camera flashes. Reporters shouted questions to which he remained silent. His legacy, his carefully polished image, was completely destroyed. The city turned its back on Mary. Her friends stopped answering her calls. Her name was whispered in supermarket lines, in coffee shops, on the same pews in the church where she sat every Sunday. She was alone. Completely and utterly alone. And I kept moving forward. I enrolled Emily in a new school, away from the scandal and gossip. I sold our house and moved to a smaller, quieter neighborhood where no one knew our names. Every night I would put Emily to bed, kiss her on the forehead and say, "Asterisk, Daddy loves you." Everything is going to be okay. And for the first time in months, I almost believed it. It happened 6 months later. I was walking in the park with Emily, the sun was shining golden on the trees. And then I saw her. Mary. She was sitting on a bench. Our eyes met, and for a moment I saw the woman I had once loved. Emily pulled my hand. "Daddy, who is that?" "No one, sweetheart," I answered quietly, leading her away. Mary didn't call after me. She just sat there, watching us disappear into the distance. Revenge is sweet in the moment, but the aftertaste is always bitter. I had won. I exposed them, stripped them of everything they had built on lies and deceit. But Emily will grow up without her mother by her side. And that will always haunt me. Some nights I still think about Mary. About the choices she made. About how everything could have been different if she had just told me the truth. But you can't change the past. All I can do now is protect Emily. And raise her.